Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm happy to be here and thrilled to be a guest of Agile Tour Quebec and to share a few ideas with you today. I'm going to share my screen and walk you through a bit of this, what I believe to be is a really interesting story, and a story that I've discovered over the years really makes people think, right? As we kind of think about this, and you'll see the story is really kind of in three parts. The initial part is really going to talk about what's different today when it comes to software development, when it comes to agile organizations that wasn't really available to us in the past. The second part is really about the incredible opportunity that this presents us, and the way that this can really help us create amazing products and services that truly meet the needs of our customers. And the third part is where it gets, I think, particularly interesting, is how we choose to use that opportunity in the name of the success criteria that we define for our products and services. And so the story starts really with this. This is where I started my career. When I started working professionally, this is how software was delivered. This is how software was consumed. I worked on the software that went on these CDs. And at that time, right, when you launched software on fixed medium, when you went to the store and you bought a box of software, right? Learning loops were long. This was, it took a long time to learn whether or not the thing that you delivered actually had value, whether people used it, whether they found it valuable, whether they actually, it improved their lives in some measurable way. The adoption of software was slow. It took time to get the software out. You had to actually print it. You had to put it in a box. You had to shrink wrap the box and either put it in the mail or put it on a shelf. And so it took time for software to get adopted. And the impact of that technology, the technology that we made, was limited to tech-savvy individuals, people who could afford computers, people who understood the value and the benefits of having ones. And so that was a significantly smaller portion of the population. And the goal back then, the goal of making the software was works as designed. You know, if it did the thing that the specification document called for, that was deemed a success. If you shipped the software on time, if you just shipped it, forget on time, if you just shipped it, that was the measure of success. And then we would move on to the next project, the next version of the CD, the next version of the boxed software. That was 20 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that now, right? What's happened since then is that software has eaten the world. Mark Andreessen famously said in 2011 that software is eating the world. I would argue that 10 years later, software has eaten the world at this point. Everything that we use, everything that we consume has software embedded in it. In fact, our organizations are built around technology as a way to scale and grow and build value for our customers, right? So obviously, there's our phones are filled with software. Our coffee machines have software inside them to help make us bake better coffee, which is very, very important. I was going to say on most days. The truth is, it's very important on every day. And people are trying to put technology literally in everything. This is the SMALT. It is, as far as I know, the world's first connected salt shaker. Why they put software into a salt shaker, I don't know. But the idea is that software has truly eaten and consumed the world. And perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of technology today versus 20 years ago when I started working professionally is the nature of software. We have fundamentally changed how we build technology. The ability to deliver continuously, to test automatically, to roll back if we need to integrate, to build these DevOps cultures has changed the nature of software. When I was helping make software that went on CDs, that software was static. Today, software is continuous. We don't build widgets of software. We build systems of software that we can continuously update for as long as we want, for infinity, really. And what's interesting is that organizations are starting to get this. This is a quote from the group executive chairman of BBVA, which is a big Spanish bank. And the important part is that part there in orange in the middle where he says, look, we are therefore competing in a race that has no finish line or predetermined route, right? The finish line used to be our definition of done. Predetermined route used to be our project plans, the waterfall project plans about how to get there. But today, because we're building these systems that can be continuously improved and continuously optimized, we don't have a path, a map to get there. A predetermined route is a roadmap, right? And there is no finish line. And so we have to really rethink the definition of done. Now, look, the organizations that I work with, and my guess is the organizations that most of you work with, think like this. They think like the automotive industry, this idea of the model year, right? For 100 years, the only way that you can get your car to do new things is to buy next year's model, right? You want your car to do new stuff? Buy the 2020 model, buy the 2021 model. And we believe that it has to be this way because it's always been this way. But in reality, this was a marketing gimmick. It was conceived by Alfred Sloan at General Motors 100 years ago, specifically to get you to buy a new car every year. But most of the organizations that I've worked with throughout my career and that I consult with today, I've applied this model to technology. And you know, we've seen this time and time again, right? Windows 95 has a model year on it. They did it in 98. They did it in 2000. Eventually, we've started to drop this off. But this is how organizations think. We've got these big bang releases. That's how we add new value. And then disruptors come in. Right? Disruptors come in and they show us that you can actually use technology differently to build different models, to build different business models, to build different ways of actually delivering value to your customers. You no longer have to buy a new car, if you buy a Tesla, for it to be able to do new things. In fact, you can go to sleep, you can wake up in the morning, the software updates, and the car can drive itself. The car can park itself. And it's not just the vehicles themselves that are updating continuously and delivering more value. It's the system that supports the cars that is also updating as quickly as the organization wants to. This story here in the middle is about how Tesla went from a feature, from a tweet to a shipped feature in 6 days. So this guy here in the middle, he tweets at Elon Musk and he says, listen, Elon, because that's what we all call him, right? He says, listen, Elon, every time that I go to charge my Tesla in San Mateo in California, it's always full with drivers, Tesla owners. He uses a different word. We'll just call them Tesla owners who leave their Tesla for hours, even if it's already charged. Elon Musk, within an hour, the CEO of the company is sensing what's happening on a macro level from his customers. And he says, look, within an hour, he tweets back, he says, you're right. This is an issue. I'm on it. I'm going to fix it. 6 days later, Tesla changes how the supercharger network works. Every minute that you spend connected to a charger after your car is already completely full of charge costs you money. Right? Now, Tesla is able to react like that in 6 days because they think like a software company. Right? There's no way in the world that a BMW, a General Motors, a Ford Motor Company, none of those organizations could react like that in 6 days because they don't think like a software company. And the amazing part of all of this is that this helps Tesla kind of not only redefine their products, their services, and how they deliver value, right? But it helps them redefine their business model so they can stay, it's not even stay competitive with other car companies, it's kind of redefine the market, right? Because they're the only car maker worldwide that can continuously improve the vehicles it has sold for free. That completely changes how you make money in the auto industry. So they're redefining the business model thanks to continuous technology. And just to give you just to drive this home, my friend Adam in the US, he has a Tesla Model 3 and he sends me these screenshots of the app all the time. And he said, look, I woke up this morning and my car got more powerful, right? 5% power, I did nothing. Software update overnight, that's amazing. And that's tremendous value. And this continuous delivery capability provides us with a tremendous opportunity. What it allows us to do is to build and maintain a continuous conversation with our customers. That's the beauty of Agile software development. We have the ability to build and maintain continuous conversations with the people that we serve with our digital products and services. And the way that we do that is we continuously ship small things into the hands of our users. We then sense the impact that that small delivery of software had on the behavior of our customers. And then we have the responsibility as an organization to answer the question, what are we going to do about what we just sensed and what we learned? Now, this is our feedback loop today, right? It's not a linear process. It's a circular process. We ship something, we sense the impact that it has on customer behavior, and we respond to that based on what we've learned from the process. And our goal as Agile software development teams and Agile software developers is to reduce the time through this feedback loop to the shortest possible time that we can that we can make happen, right? What's the fastest feedback loop that we can make happen? Because the faster that you can learn, the less you invest in an idea. The less you invest in an idea, the easier it is to be wrong. The easier it is to course correct because you haven't invested that much in it. So if you can get through this, remember in the America Online days, it would take us 6 to 12 months to ship a new CD, right? If you can get through this feedback loop in 6 hours or 6 days, well, that investment is significantly smaller. And if you got something wrong that didn't impact customer behavior in a positive way, well, you can roll that back. You can learn from that and you can move forward. And the idea then is to get through this loop and course correct as quickly as possible. That's Agile. And more importantly, that is agility. Now, there's a reason why there are two separate colors on here. Shipping continuously to market is the result of organizational will and investment. As a company, you have to want to deliver continuously, and you have to invest in the infrastructure that allows you to do that. Sensing is the same thing. As an organization, you have to want to know what your customers are doing with your product and why, and you have to invest in that. You have to invest in analytics, in reporting, in qualitative research, in market research, et cetera, in product discovery, and those types of things. Responding is a cultural shift. There's no amount of money that you can throw at the respond bubble here that would make it safe for me to stand up in front of my organization and say, I was wrong. We didn't get that product right. We need to change that, right? We need to build the kind of culture that allows us to ship, sense, and respond without consequence. And the way that we do that is with continuous software, because again, it's a lot easier to stand up in front of your boss and say, we got this wrong, when you learn that after a week or 2 weeks, than it does after 2 months or 6 months or a year. And that's our goal. And in doing so, right, it moves us away from this software factory model, right? Because if we're delivering software continuously, then the production of software is not what we're celebrating, right? Instead, right, we move away from this mindset that more code equals more value. It doesn't. More code does not necessarily equal more value. The only thing that more code actually equals is more code and maybe some tech debt. And that's about it. And so we have to change our measure of success, right? Delivering software continuously means we can't celebrate every release like we used to in the waterfall days, right? In the waterfall days, we'd ship a CD after 12 months of development, and we'd have a party and we'd get a t-shirt and it would be amazing. Today, we've got to think about that because there's this sense that just because you can build it doesn't mean that you should. Right? If you're moving out of that software factory model, you have to be more deliberate about what you're actually building. Otherwise, you start to create these bloated products that have all these features that only a small percentage of your users actually take advantage of, and everything else goes unused, right? And so what should our new measure of success be? Well, I propose that it should be outcomes. Outcomes are measurable changes in user behavior, right? It's that sensing portion. You ship something and you sense how that changed the behavior of your users. Outcomes tell us when we've delivered customer value because we see that customers are doing something more successfully or less successfully. And more importantly, it's these outcomes that tell us when we're done. When we see enough behavior change, we can decide to move on to the next feature. We're done continuously optimizing this thing. Because remember, if you're building these systems, you could optimize them forever. And so the definition of done is when we hit enough of a change in customer behavior. Now, here's the challenge. The challenge is that we can't predict behavior. It's easy for us to think about features, about output, the stuff that we can make, and it's easy to believe that we know what users will do with those things. But the reality, we can't predict human behavior. Let me show you an example. This is an intersection in Massachusetts. You can clearly see that in the middle of the road, there is a right turn only arrow. Now, imagine that it's your job to make this intersection safer. And to make it safer, you tell your boss, listen, I'm going to get people to stop at this intersection and to not turn left. And you tell your boss, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to put up a stop sign. And I'm going to put a no left turn sign, and that's going to get people to stop. And so you install that. And then what happens, right? In Massachusetts, people are just going to ignore those signs and go where they actually want to go, right? And so with every idea that we have, with every feature, with every output, with everything that we want to make, right, there's a good chance that we're wrong about how our users are going to take advantage of that. We may think they'll do one thing, they may end up doing something else. Now look, to be very clear, the output, the stuff that we made here are the signs, and there's nothing wrong with these signs. They meet specifications, right? They work as designed in the spec. The problem is that they didn't change human behavior. They didn't change the outcome. And that's why we have to continuously improve and optimize our systems. And that's the benefit of this new modern development. Now look, software systems are complex and unpredictable. It turns out that humans are also complex and unpredictable and stubborn. And just because you put something in their way doesn't mean that that's going to stop them from doing what they've always done. They're going to figure out how to do the thing that they want to do, regardless of the obstacles you put in their way. Okay. Now, this gets even more challenging because even if you start to figure out your users' behaviors, that behavior is not static. It evolves and it changes over time. In fact, new behavior emerges through the use of the systems that we build. So we build a system to do one thing, people start to use it, and then they discover they can do other things with it, and that evolves through the use of the system. This is why we have to continuously sense and respond to pay attention to that. Because if we don't, we miss those opportunities to improve the experience based on those new emergent behaviors, right? So here's an example. This is Instagram, right? Instagram is the place where you go and you post that one perfect picture of the day. So this, and look, the reality is that posting that one perfect picture of the day is a lot of pressure, right? Maybe you've traveled somewhere, maybe you've gone somewhere, you've taken a bunch of photos. Which one am I going to post? Which one's the most beautiful, the most perfect one? I'm going to post that one. Okay. Now, it's a lot of pressure for me, sort of a middle-aged white guy. It's a ton more pressure, it turns out, for teenage girls, right? So this girl goes to the beach. Someone takes this photo of her. She crops out the part that you see in the Instagram frame. That's going to go on Instagram. And then, you know, dad over here on the left in the gray shorts, he doesn't make it, right? He doesn't make it onto Instagram. He gets cut out. That's what gets posted on there. Turns out that excuse me, turns out that that's a lot of pressure for teenage girls. And the emergent behavior that we've seen in that Instagram never predicted was the rise of Finsta. Now, if you don't know what Finsta is, I have 2 teenage daughters, so I'm very well aware of what this is. Finsta is fake Instagram. They're private, closed groups of friends on Instagram where they can do stuff like this. Post a silly photo, scribble all over it, and relieve the stress of posting that one perfect picture of the day. That's what Finsta is. Instagram never predicted this behavior. They saw it emerge through the use of their system. They saw it emerge outside of their system with the rise of Snapchat, those ephemeral stories that disappeared every 24 hours. They brought it back in-house as Instagram stories, arguably one of their more successful features in recent years. And they continue to evolve and optimize it to make it a better experience. Most recently, adding this concept of Reels to combat with TikTok, another emergent behavior that they're seeing happen outside of their system. They want to bring that inside. And so they're continuously optimizing their system, their products and their services based on emergent customer behavior. Very, very important. And the continuous software allows us to do that. Now, there's another problem, is that we can't predict the future. You can't predict human behavior. You can't predict the future. And a lot of things throw us for loops. And the more agile we are as an organization, the more that we can continuously sense and respond, ship, sense, and respond, the more that we can adjust to these new realities. These agile businesses can pivot quickly to ensure they survive any event, right? That's the point of this continuous learning loop. And so we've seen examples of this, right? Where distilleries very quickly shifted to making hand sanitizer with in-house alcohol, right? To deal with the COVID pandemic. And the organizations that aren't agile, well, they can't pivot very quickly. And we're seeing a lot of pain and a lot of stress in those industries, including the airline industry specifically is a good example of organizations that aren't particularly agile in all of this. And there are companies out there that really feel like, hey, we know what we're doing. We've done this before. We're amazing at it. So we're just going to go ahead and dump a bunch of money into this. And we know how customers are going to use the product. And then it turns out that actually you didn't know what was going on, right? As Quibi showed us. And then eventually you burn through nearly $2 billion to find out that no one wanted your product because you assumed that people would do certain things with your feature instead of sensing and responding and continuously learning your way to better outcomes. Now, look, we can use this technology to learn continuously, to make our users more successful, to pivot our businesses, to ultimately become more successful. And those are some of the examples I showed you here as well. But what's interesting is that if we don't explicitly pay attention to how we're optimizing our customer behaviors and what we're doing to drive those behaviors, then what seems trivial can ultimately end up creating unintended consequences in the real world. And it's interesting because if we do start to adopt this ship, sense, and respond model, this managing the outcomes model, but we blindly optimize for those metrics, for those user behaviors, without considering what the real world implications are for those blind optimizations, well, we're being, at best, that's a risky maneuver. And at worst, it can be criminal, which is crazy to even think about, right? As software developers, as scrum masters, as product owners, how can the work that we are developing potentially be criminal? I'm going to show you some examples of organizations and companies who have decided to manage the outcomes, who've decided to ship, sense, and respond, to learn continuously, but have not optimized for those metrics with eyes open. And they've created these pesky negative real world consequences that are now causing harm to other people, and something that we have to keep a hold of as we begin to shift the way that we work and as we increase the agility inside our organizations. So let's start with engagement, right? Engagement as a customer behavior, and perhaps the obvious target to pick on here is Facebook, right? What are Facebook outcomes? What are Facebook's outcomes? Well, Facebook did the industry a favor, you could say, or not, but they invented the metrics, or gave the world the metrics of MAU and DAU. Monthly active users and daily active users. Everything at Facebook is focused on getting users engaged on a daily and on a monthly basis. Everything that they do is to feed your engagement in that system, regardless of those pesky negative real world consequences, right? For example, in Myanmar, Facebook is the internet, right? There is no, people assume that Facebook is the internet. And what Facebook did was create an enabling environment for the proliferation of human rights abuses. There's a genocide going on in Myanmar, and people were engaging on Facebook to identify and locate minority Rohingyas in the country so that the army could go and kill them and create a genocide. Now, Facebook was seeing this as increased engagement in the platform. And so they were driving up those posts, which were further exacerbating the issue of identifying these minorities in the country who were then being hunted down and killed. Facebook has more than 18 million users in Myanmar, and this is their main source of getting news and information. Right? And they're continuing this in the name of engagement, blindly optimizing for it without seeing the negative real-world consequences. Right? We're seeing this in the US with the election coming up next week, right? Facebook has basically said, look, we're going to let people lie online. We're going to let politicians lie, and we're going to let other folks determine whether that's valuable or not, because those incendiary posts get likes and they get shares and they get views. And so regardless of that, we're going to promote more of that in the name of engagement, regardless of the harm that that does to democracy or civil conversation or discourse in the United States. YouTube, another company that optimizes for engagement, time on site, number of videos viewed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go down one, and I know you've all done this, I've done this too, you pick one video that you like. Sometimes I'll watch music videos, or I'll watch this thing, they'll show you 1,000 videos by that same band. The same thing happens with hate videos as well. So what's happening on YouTube is if you start going down a particular rat hole like white supremacy, for example, YouTube is just going to continue to show you more hate videos. And it turns out that it starts to actually radicalize young people and turn them to hate and to violence and to anger, because they're being optimized for engagement, right? Without eyes open, looking at the negative real world consequences. Let's talk about sales. We talked about engagement. Let's talk about sales. In this particular example, in the name of sales, blindly optimizing for outcomes can cause relationship stress. There's a story in the United States about Target, the department store, figuring out, based on a teenage girl's shopping patterns, that she was pregnant. Her family didn't know. Her father didn't know. Target knew. And Target started sending her advertising, digital advertising and physical advertising, to her home for pregnancy products. Her parents didn't know. Target told her parents, and she had to go confess to her parents that she was indeed pregnant. Someone had to write the code to capture this information, analyze it, and decide how to act on it without considering the pesky real-world negative consequences. In the name of efficiency, blindly optimizing for outcomes can discriminate. Amazon is interesting, right? Amazon must get thousands of applications for jobs every day. They need help weeding out unqualified applications. Well, it turns out that they built an AI and deployed it to make the process of sifting through these applications for their HR department more efficient. That's an outcome, right? Optimizing for that outcome. Well, it turns out that that algorithm had the biases of its creators in it, and it penalized resumes that included the word women's chess club, and it downgraded resumes for women who graduated from all women's colleges, right? So in the name of efficiency, we've created this efficiency, but we haven't started to pay attention to what the actual net result is. And the net result here is that qualified women were being left out of the talent pool, right? Same things here. Again, job interviews. In the UK, they're using AI in job videos to find the best applicants. And what we're seeing time and time again is that the algorithms that are using these videos to compare against high performers in the organizations inevitably have these built-in biases. And so even if they're increasing the efficiency of the HR department or the recruiters, without actually looking to see if that efficiency is driving better candidates, better hiring, more diverse hiring, right? We are creating those negative real-world consequences. Convenience. Software drives convenience, right? Amazing uses for convenience. Turns out, if you don't pay attention, you can actually use it to hurt people. Smart homes, interconnected locks, smart speakers, smart thermostats, lights, cameras. They've been marketed as conveniences inside the home, and they're being used for harassment. So couples live together. They kit their home with smart home devices. They control everything from their phone, and then they break up. And it turns out that then one partner starts to abuse the other partner from a distance. They turn the music all the way up. They turn the heat all the way up or all the way down, right? To abuse them. None of those safety protocols were ever built in there because the teams that built these products never considered these consequences. They optimized for the convenience, but not for the edge cases of abuse. And again, and then finally, look, in the name of news, ultimately, right, this can, optimizing for outcomes can elevate the worst in us, right? Whatever drives clicks, whatever drives traffic, that's what we're going to put on the news, regardless of the impact that it has on the collective psyche of a country or of the world. And as you're working on these products, and all of us work on these products, our software makes people more efficient, more successful. We sell more stuff with our software. We engage more people with our software. We educate with our software. We have to ask ourselves, are we solving user needs? Or are we exploiting those users' needs? Because both of those can make us money, right? The question is, which business do we want to be in? And we have that capability today to raise our hand and ask these questions. Now, Ellen Powell in Wired said, look, this is a leadership issue. Right, and I think that there's something to absolutely something to say there, right? So social media companies and the leaders who run them is what Ellen Powell said. They're rewarded for reach and engagement, not for positive impact on the communities or for protecting subsets of users from harm. They're rewarded for keeping costs down and driving up engagement. And I agree that that's the case. But the people who make the software have the opportunity and the responsibility to raise their hand and say, look, you know what? This isn't right. This is starting to hurt people. We've got to change how this works and raise our hand, right? Continuously optimizing for these behavior changes isn't going to actually make people more successful anymore, despite that being our goal. In my travels as a designer, as a product manager, as a coach and a consultant, both for teams and executives, I've seen a lot of teams wrestle with this. And I've seen a lot of feedback from teams that worries me a little bit when it comes to thinking very, very clearly through how to make sure that you're always assuring that those edge cases aren't happening and they're not actually hurting people. And there's a couple of phrases that come up over and over again with Agile teams especially that I wanted to cover. This is one that comes up all the time, particularly from software engineers. It says, look, I trust my product manager. Right? They did the research, they did the work, they've determined what the success criteria is, they've determined what outcomes we're targeting. So I'm just going to build the thing that they think is going to achieve that, right? You don't have that luxury anymore. You have to think critically, you have to ask tough questions, you have to consider the edge cases. This idea, I hear this one a lot too, this idea that I just want to write code, right? It's just not an option anymore in a world where technology is consumed by everybody. Right? 20, 25 years ago, when we were making those CDs, right, the impact on the world was small. Today, Facebook has 2 billion users. Instagram has 1 billion users, right? The idea that you just want to write code is insufficient for a modern day software developer or a designer or anybody who wants to work on these continuously improving Agile teams, right? My friend Kenneth said this really perfectly, I thought, in his book, Future Ethics. He said, look, by default, these new technologies that we build bear the ethical fingerprints of their creators, not of wider society. That's you, right? Your biases end up in your designs and in your code, and your code has broad impact on society that may not reflect the broader beliefs of that society. And we've got to continuously challenge that as we're optimizing our systems for behavior. Because the thing you've got to continuously ask yourself, hey, I just want to code, I trust my product manager, is what will your code be used to do? You have to take an interest in the strategic implications of the code you write. Because you know what, right? It's you who's going to pay the price. If you don't know who this is on screen, his name is James Liang. He's a software engineer. He's the guy who wrote the code at Volkswagen that cheated the diesel emissions machines, right? What did he think people were going to do with that code? Right? What was the outcome he was going for? He never once raised his hand. He's in jail, right? The CEO of Volkswagen, not in jail, right? And so you really have to think through these negative real world consequences and raise them up as they come up, right? Look, and moving on is great. It's a great place to start, right? As organizations start to continuously flaunt this and show that they don't care, moving on from those organizations, if you've got that privilege, if you've got that opportunity, it's a great way to do it. Better late than never is the path here. Now, as you think about how to make this better, right? Couple thoughts here, couple closing thoughts here about how to make this better. Number one, I love this quote from my friend Kim Goodwin. She says, look, as we build these outcome-based teams, these customer-centric agile teams, we want to be goal-driven and we want to be values-guided, and we want to measure both. Goals are the outcomes that we're targeting. They are the metrics of success, the behavior change. Values are the things that we're not willing to sacrifice to get there. And we should be constantly measuring both. If they start to conflict, you've got to raise your hand and you've got to say something. And so you're asking yourself, well, what can I do? What can you do? Let me share with you a few things you can do, and then I'll wrap this up. Number one, understand your business model. It's no longer okay to say, I'm just going to design, I'm just going to write code, I'm just going to be the product owner. You have to understand how your organization makes money and how the work that you do helps the organization make money. You have to take an interest in your customers. All of them, not just the primary personas, but the edge cases as well. Understand what people do with it, how they do it, what they're looking to do with it, and look for those emergent behaviors. Use the software that you're building to learn and to sense and to respond and to identify those emergent behaviors. Measure the impact of your work. Understand how that behavior is changing on a grand scale, and look for spikes in anomalous behavior that may indicate that some people are using this for malicious intent. In advance of building the code, discuss the dangerous edge cases. What if somebody used this for X? What if somebody used this to identify somebody so somebody else can go harm them, right? How do we protect against that? Ask those questions up front. It's very important because remember, you cannot predict human behavior. They will surprise you and they will do things with your products and your softwares that you didn't expect. And then ultimately, refuse the work that harms people. Right? You can do that. You can say, listen, I'm not going to build this because I see too many negative real world consequences for this. And we've got to figure out how to solve for that before we ship this. These are at least 6 things that you can do. And so look, I'll close with this. Jurassic Park always has good quotes for everything, right? If you're looking for a good quote movie, Jurassic Park always has good ones. This is what I'm asking you to do. You're the scientists, right? Don't get so preoccupied about whether or not you can do something that you don't stop to think if you should do something. And with that, I want to say thank you very much for having me. Thanks for listening. I know it's a lot to contemplate. I'm happy to discuss this. I'm happy to ask questions, to answer questions, whatever you'd like to discuss about. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess we're going to go. Okay, do you see the chat? You want me to tell you the questions? It could be easier.
Especially if they're in French. I took French in high school. I'm learning Spanish for 3 years, but if they're
I was expecting to test you there, but okay.
I appreciate it.
I'm getting good comments. Thanks. A great presentation. Amazing. One of the best presentations I've seen in a while. Thanks. Merci. Wow. Inspiring. Great.
See, I remember, but they also use it in Catalan. So I live in Barcelona, as you know, and so there's a lot of French in Catalan. So
yes, there is.
It reminds me of it as well.
So I don't know if anybody has any questions or would like to have discussions. No?
Some people have their hands up in the attendees. I see 2 hands up under attendees. I don't know if that's a question. But yeah, this question.
Yeah. Okay, I'll let talk Mathieu. Go ahead. You can talk now, Mathieu. Doesn't seem to be working. Can you unmute? You need to unmute, Mathieu. I allowed you to talk, but you need to unmute your microphone.
One question just came in here too, Eric. From
okay.
Vincent.
Okay, so I'll go with the, so you see the question here, and I'll try to see what doesn't work with the Mathieu.
Yeah, okay, so Vincent asks, how do you think you can refuse the work? Oh, it scrolled away. How do you think you can refuse the work or maybe convince your managers to change their views when your life depends on you having your job? No, I get that. I get that, right? So look, I think that ultimately, you've got to show evidence. I think there's got to be evidence, right? And so one thing you can say, look, what if people do this with the product, right? How do we protect against people doing X with the product? And I think that's the way to start the conversation. Now, if that gets dismissed and you believe that this is a real risk, you need to keep an eye on that behavior. And if that behavior starts to crop up, then you need to start feeding that back to the team and their stakeholders. Hey, folks, listen, the more popular this thing gets, the more we're seeing people abusing it. More people see people doing this with that. We really need to figure out how to make this stop, how to move this forward. And I think that that's the best thing that you can do, is to continually raise your hand and offer evidence that this is happening. Now, if the organization refuses to deal with that and says, whatever, that's collateral damage, we're not going to deal with it, then you've got a difficult choice to make, right? Because you need the job, you need to stay there. And so at the very least, maybe you can start a parallel job search. But I think the best thing that you can do is surface evidence and be objective about it and say, look, I think this is going to happen. And if it does start to happen, show the evidence of it actually taking place.
Okay. Mathieu, I've promoted you to panelist, so you'll be able to talk. Is it easier to unmute for you there? So, because if that doesn't work, I don't know how to make it work. Tu m'entends, Mathieu?
There was another question here that I saw. It said from Tomas. It said, where would you say the line is between malicious usage and unintended consequence? Thinking about the Amazon reveal pregnancy was targeted, but same thing. Case that doesn't seem to be the employee's fault, right? So look, there's clearly malicious intent and there's clearly unintended consequences. The net result is the same, right? The net result is that this is happening. So obviously, if someone did it with malicious intent, they should be fired immediately, right? That's right. But if there's an unintended consequence, right? The quicker that we recognize it, the quicker that we raise it and say, listen, hey, you know what? We didn't expect this to happen, right? We can't predict user behavior, right? Or it emerged through the use of the system. We never saw this happening before, but it's happening now. Great. Let's deal with it now. It has to be prioritized, right? So assuming it was not malicious intention, you can prioritize it and get it fixed, right? The line is figuring out how it happened in the first place, right? And I think it's pretty easy to see if someone explicitly said, we're going to feed people a bunch of racist comments, right? Versus, right, hey, we built this algorithm and it caught, like a teenage girl got caught up in this algorithm. How do we keep that from happening? How do we find out the age? How do we expand what the algorithm does so that the age of the person is part of that algorithm, right? I think those are the questions that you ask.
Mathieu, can you talk?
Yes, Eric, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I hit the button by mistake. So I'm very sorry.
Go ahead. Oh, you mean the mistake? You didn't want to ask a question?
No, I don't have a question, but I can make a commentary. It was a very great presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Mathieu.
Excellent. Excellent. There's a question here that says, should we understand from your presentation that the customers remain at the center of the organization because our success depends on our customers? Absolutely. Customer has to be at the center, and your success does depend on your customers and them being successful. Unless them being successful means them hurting other people. Then you got to ask yourself, what business am I in, right? How do we make money, right? If we make money when people get hurt, you got to ask yourself whether or not that's a project you want to be a part of anymore. I'll tell you an example, okay? About a year ago, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to join him on a pitch for a project. And I've always wanted to work with this guy. It's been a long time since we worked together. I like him a lot. And I thought it would be a really interesting engagement. And so I said, yes, let's pitch. It turns out it was for a defense contractor. Okay, we were going to do some product management coaching, some agile coaching, some lean startup coaching, that kind of thing, OKRs, that type of thing. It dawned on me pretty quickly that if we make this organization more successful, they will create products and services that kill people more successfully. right? That doesn't jive with my ethics. And so I withdrew from the pitch. It wasn't for me. And look, I have that luxury. I have that privilege right now to say no to that work, right? That's fantastic. And that allows me to at least raise that objection, say, look, I don't want to do this, right? Not everybody has that. I get it. But we do have the responsibility, I think, while we're in the thick of it, to raise our hand and ask these tough questions.
So I ask, I don't want to mispronounce your name, but Mylin Lumino, you can talk. All you need to do is unmute if you have a question. Okay, then I guess we'll take the questions here down. Do you see the same questions than me? Should we understand from your presentation?
I think so. I see one here from Pierre-Luc. It says, do you think the sense and respond should come from the top down or bottom up? So look, I think it's a cultural thing. Culture is driven by leadership, right? I think it's the behaviors that we celebrate and condone and reward. Like I said, there's investments in technology that make it possible, but there are reward structures, performance management structures, goal-setting frameworks that managers can choose to drive sensing and responding and to drive continuous learning and optimization. And so I think teams will benefit from that, and they can ask for that, but there's a lot of sort of top-down support that needs to be there initially to build that sense and respond culture. So for example, objectives and key results, right? If an organization uses them properly, the key result should be an outcome. It should be a change in the behavior of your customer, the thing that we've been talking about here for the last 45 minutes. That implicitly or explicitly forces the team to then go discover how to best get customers to change that behavior, right? To ship, sense, and respond. So that happens if you use OKRs properly. But the only way that OKRs get implemented and properly is through leadership support and top-down support for them. So there is a lot of top-down responsibility here, right? And then teams then have the responsibility to use these tools and these cultural benefits, I suppose, to ensure that you're serving your customers in the most positive way. Let's look at some of these. Why are there any laws that could stop mega companies and products to promote war or discrimination? Instead, that comes from the employees and customers. I don't know. I'm not a politician. So we could discuss politics, but I don't really know. Should we work with professional orders like engineers and doctors? That's really interesting, right? Should there be like a code of ethics for designers, for software engineers? I think that's a really, really interesting question and a really interesting proposal, and would make for a fascinating conference presentation or a panel discussion or a Twitter thread. And I wholeheartedly encourage you to engage the community with that question. It sounds compelling. Let's discuss what that means and the implications of that, right? It's like, do you have to become a certified software engineer, right? Which always raises the question of like, who certifies the certifiers, right? That's why the design world has always balked at this, but maybe it's time, right? Do you think the PO role should stand if the team should be in charge of delivering the outcomes? I think a product manager / product owner role, and I'm not getting into that discussion right now. I do think they're the same person. And since I have the microphone, I can say that without anybody yelling at me. But I think that teams need product managers and product owners. I think that teams work collaboratively. I think somebody needs to have final decision-making authority on a team. I think that's great. But I think the team, it's a collaboration ultimately, right? Collaboration is not necessarily democracy, right? But it does allow everybody to raise their voice. And if you're not the decision maker on a team and you see the product that you're working on causing unintended negative real world consequences, then it's your responsibility to tell the PO, to tell the team and say, look, this is happening and we should do something about it. So yes, there's still a purpose for the PO or the PM, right? And yes, you still have a responsibility, regardless of whether that's you or it's not you, to raise these issues as you see them come up.
I think we'll go for maybe another question since we need. No, I think we got. No, we still got time. We got 10 minutes. The next meeting is at 2:10.
Okay. I like this one. It says some ethic dilemma can be easy to identify, but some are less visible. What are your tools to help in finding those? So I really like, I'll go back to that slide I showed you from Kim Goodwin, the phrase from Kim Goodwin. It says goals-driven, values-based. So visualize those values, right? So what are our goals and what are our values? Let's write it down. Put it on the wall at work, put it as, you know, as the welcome message in your Slack channel every time you sign in, that type of thing. Whatever it is, here are our values. So that people are continuously reminded, whether or not, they're reminded of the values, and if they see something that violates that, raise their hand. I think that creating a paths of little or no resistance for people to talk about this kind of stuff is really important as well. So, hey, if you see us doing something that you believe is hurting customers, tell us. Here's the channel to do that. Make it obvious, make it clear, make it clear that it's not it's not going to be punished, that there's psychological safety to say these things. And in fact, right, we're going to take it very seriously when these things come up. So I think that's really important.
There's a good question here. Should we work within a professional order like engineers and doctors? Are we reaching an area where we should at least ask the question?
Yeah, and so we talked about it a second ago, but the short of it is really good question. And at this point, I think I think my guess is you'll find more support for that these days than you used to in the past. And maybe so. It just gets, you know, it's doctors have governing bodies, right? Lawyers have governing bodies. Software engineers don't, right? So who certifies the certifiers? What makes somebody, that becomes a big challenge here. But that to me is an interesting question. Definitely one to bring up.
We go for one more before we leave.
Excellent. Yes. You have a preference here?
No.
Did you play electric piano? I do play piano, not just the electric, but the acoustic as well. I do. So thank you for asking. That one's just a toy that sits in my room. Let's see. CI/CD is often hard in legacy systems. What is the solution for large enterprise with technical debt? It's over my head, man. I don't know the answer to that. So I like this one. So I like this last question from Yannick here. What is the success criteria to implement sense and respond in a corporation? I actually really like this question. So that's a good one to close on. I think it's interesting because you're changing how an organization works. Okay. So if you're changing how an organization works, you're looking for changes in the behavior of the people who work inside that organization, right? You're looking for outcomes. Surprise, surprise, right? Here we are, back where we started, right? You're looking for outcomes. Now, the outcomes that you're looking for are going to be, what are people doing differently now that sense and respond is a way of life than they were doing before, right? Sense and respond was a way of life. So for example, we're seeing every new initiative start with a customer problem rather than a set of features to implement. To me, that would be a nice, a good outcome, right? So when someone pitches a new project, product, initiative, whatever it is, right, it always starts with a problem statement rather than, hey, here's a cool thing we can build, so let's do it, right? To me, that's really interesting. Success criteria, right? How do we make the success criteria of a project not outputs, but outcomes, right? OKRs, right? That becomes a really interesting measure of that. Things like that, and I think you're looking at feelings of productivity, you're looking for employee happiness, those types of things here as well. And so you're looking for outcomes, you're looking for meaningful changes in the behavior of staff and of executives that indicate that this is the way that we're working now.
Yeah, thank you.
Fair enough.
The presentation, you authorize us, the conference was recorded, so authorize us to give it to the participants and the presentation. And if anyone is interested in the books, you have the information, and you will have the description in the last slide. So I guess all I have to say, Jeff, is thank you very much for your conference today. It was very interesting. It was good meeting you, and hope to, I'll make a little search and I'll see some of your other conference, I guess.
Terrific. Well, thank you again for having me, folks. Please don't hesitate to reach out. If anything, connect on LinkedIn, and I hope we get to meet in real life someday soon.
We hope so too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.